Right, well, welcome everyone to our May webinar looking at the internet and internet governance. I'm Michael Lewis, AUDA's Industry Relations Manager. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm coming to you from today, the original home of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Please note this session is being recorded. I'll now hand over to AUDA's CEO, Rosemary Sinclair, to introduce the topic and today's speaker. Rosemary, over to you.
Thanks, Mike, and welcome everybody to today, our session on internet governance. Internet governance, of course, is certainly really important to AUDA as the .au domain administrator, but it's absolutely critical to the users of the .au and the internet more generally. AUDA, along with industry, civil society, other country code managers, the Australian government and other governments and regional partners, regularly and actively get together to participate in discussions that shape the internet, usually and most frequently at the big coordinating conference known as the ICANN conference. The way this engagement takes place is quite unique to the internet, as the internet has grown organically and rapidly. It started as a small series of disconnected networks, but is now the largest cross-jurisdictional communications platform in the history of the world. And a key to its effectiveness in large part has been that it is an open and free space for users to access, communicate, and share information. And its development has been in the interlinked hands, if you like, of the technical community, civil society, industry, and governments all working together. The internet is not governed by any one country or even a group of countries. There is no internet president and no single central decision-making body. Instead, a unique multi-stakeholder model provides the consensus and standards to allow the internet to operate seamlessly. The multi-stakeholder model sees governments, industry, the technical community, and civil society all participating in decisions about the future of the internet. This approach recognises that all stakeholders have a valuable contribution to make. One of AUDA's core functions, set out in our terms of endorsement from the Australian government, is to advocate for and actively participate in multi-stakeholder internet governance processes, both domestically and internationally. And we're committed to cooperating with stakeholders here in Australia and overseas to uphold and to increase the effectiveness of these multi-stakeholder processes. One of our important regional partners is APNIC, the Asia Pacific Network Information Centre. APNIC is a membership organisation responsible for providing Internet Protocol, or IP, the numbering part of the addressing services for the Asia Pacific region. When you type in auda.org.au, the domain name system will direct your computer to the IP address in numbers so that you can find the website for information or the email, the person whose email inbox you're looking for. We're thrilled today to be joined by APNIC's Strategic Engagement Director, Pablo Hinosa, who will speak to us about the internet's structure and governance arrangements. Pablo brings over 2 decades of experience working in communications and internet governance, including 6 years with COFETEL, the Federal Commission of Telecommunications in Mexico, 4 years with the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN, and 12 years with APNIC. Before I hand over to Pablo, could I just remind you that you can submit questions at any time via the Zoom Q&A function. We will endeavour to answer as many of those questions as we can towards the end of our presentation session today. Pablo, thank you so much for joining us, and now over to you.
Rosemary, thank you. It's such an honor to be here today. I can see around 60 participants here, so the pressure is on, and I hope you find this presentation relevant and interesting. I am going to start sharing my screen, and I would like to break the ice with this video from almost 30 years ago, and we will go from there.
What about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What the hell is that exactly?
Well, it's become a place where people are publishing information.
Right.
So everybody can have their own homepage. Companies are there, the latest information. It's wild what's going on. You can send electronic mail to people. It is the big new thing.
It actually begs the question that brings us together today about who runs the internet, particularly 30 years after Bill Gates gave that interesting definition of what the internet is, the wild new thing, right? And there are many possible answers that may come automatically to you. Particularly these days, you could think that these are the guys that actually run the internet these days. The GAFA, the Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, the tech giants. But we can also think whether it is the ones where you connect first, the ones that mostly have control over the user experience. And these are the usual ISPs in Australia that you might get your connection from. And you can also think, well, this guy is going to take over the whole connectivity in this beautiful satellite constellation that he's building. Or is it actually the content distributors? I'm not sure if you have heard of all these firms that have also quite a big influence on how the internet looks today, because they bring all these content from all parts, like streaming companies and others, closer to where you are, closer to the networks that you connect from. I'm actually thinking whether the answer of who runs the internet is these ones. I'm calling them the big offenders in the sense of being big countries that have been attributed one or few of the major cyber attacks that have had important impact on the daily lives of people. And maybe we can think about the regulators. They are the ones controlling the internet lately. And I'm putting here the European Commission as the latest general regulation on data protection has showed us. So is it any of these, or who runs the internet? So indeed, in the last 30 years after the interview between David Letterman and Bill Gates, there has been too much power accumulated in it. And there is this tension between governments and internet giants. However, the explanation that I want to give today is that there are more players in the ecosystem in addition to the usual suspects. And I'm going to give you an alternative answer today, which starts with an overview of the governance layers of the internet. You could see in the basic physical infrastructure layer, the operators, the internet service providers, the mobile companies, all those logos that are the first ones that you get your internet service from. There is a middle layer that we will be mostly touching in this conversation, which is a logical layer, mostly invisible to most of users because it is not a service that relays a lot of the usability of the internet, but it's an essential service. And it is the one that makes the internet work and devices to communicate with each other. It has to do with the addressing and the numbering and the names that we will be talking about. The layer that is mostly mentioned these days, where most of the behaviors, the good and the bad, happen, is the content and the application layers. And this design in layers is a very important feature of the internet. And it's always very important that we know in which layer we are setting policies and we are seeing behaviors in order to differentiate and not affect other layers with decisions that we're making. I talked about the system of unique identifiers, and one of the basic design features of the internet is that any device connected to any network can reach out to any other device connected to any other network. And this is true, and it happens mainly thanks to unique addressing system. It starts with numbers, but also there is the domain name system that Rosemary talked about. And it's also kind of in layers, because when an IP address wants to reach out another IP address, you can ask the domain name system to go to a website that has a name, and that name is translated into an IP number, and then the communication is enabled. In this case, you can see the .au country code top level domain for Australia, but there are other top level domain names. So this is on a hierarchy, and this hierarchy is essential for the well-functioning of the internet. You have a root system that has all the top level domains, from generic ones such as .com and .org to country codes such as .au. We're going to talk about this example. I don't know if you have seen it, but it's a new campaign from auDA, gummy.au, and it's a beautiful one because now you can directly register domain names on their .au without any second level domain. So this gives attention to the resolving of domain names into IP addresses. And that's what the DNS does in a sort of magic in a particular layer. And I'm talking all about this because the logical layer has been throughout the years the basic territory where internet governance has been built. So in the last 20 years, when we're talking about the principles, the norms, the organizations, the institutions, the decision-making procedures that have been developed and have shaped the use of the internet, we're talking mostly, to be honest, about the internet governance of the numbers and domain names, the coordination system around them. And it's important to not lose sight of this historical development, even if we think that the current internet is being run by big companies. There is a lot more into it than that. In terms of history, I will just provide a quick timeline. And the start of the internet organizations that dealt with the protocol and the standards, the Internet Engineering Task Force, for example, we're talking about close to the beginning of the 90s. And it was during the 90s that most of the organizations that coordinate the addresses and the numbers and the names happened to emerge, such as the organization that I work for, APNIC. It's turning 30 years next year. It was established in 1993. Other regional organizations dealing with IP addresses were established around that time. It was until 1999 that this organization that Rosemary reflected on, which is ICANN, it's a big umbrella that actually brought a global governance for both the numbers and the names. And that was established almost in the year 2000. Other organizations emerged later on, covering for newly developed places such as Latin America and Africa. In the meantime, you can see as well the evolution of the story of auDA that obviously was delegated in the 80s to a single guy that was managing this on his own in the University of Melbourne. And then through different iterations, particularly also sort of a vision from the government of Australia, auDA, an organization, was established around the same time that ICANN was established as well. And it has gone through different evolutions and sophistications in its governance and its strength in the organization. So if you put all of these organizations together, you can see a very distributed but decentralized ecosystem of independent organizations that have very important roles in terms of coordinating all these resources such as IP addresses, such as domain names, and setting policies for these resources to be efficiently used, fairly distributed, and also efficiently implemented all throughout the internet for it to work. There is no way that the internet can work as we see it today without the work of all these organizations. Let's go a little bit back to the ideals that brought these organizations in place. And I'm going to show you a quick video of someone that had a lot to do with institutional framework. His name is Ira Magaziner. He was at the time an advisor to the White House during the Bill Clinton administration. I hope this will come soon.
Okay, so the internet was still very small, but we felt that there needed to be some market-driven, quickly moving vehicle that could embody the marketplace and the multi-stakeholders in the internet, but be recognized by governments so that legally they could withstand legal challenges to what they were doing. And after a comment process and so on, a year and a half, ICANN was born from that process. And it was a first of its kind organization in the world, where you had a private nonprofit organization recognized by governments, with governments playing an advisory role. Now, we did that because we felt that even though we were supporters of the United Nations overall, that the internet needed to be market-driven, it needed to be bottoms up, it needed to be democratic, and it needed to move quickly.
So it was an initiative from the government of the United States to set up a new way of working. And that was what triggered the creation of ICANN. At the time, ICANN was under close supervision of the United States government. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it because there were many challenges to this model of a private sector non-for-profit organization based in the US with some attachment to the government. So when this news emerged about this new organization, during a summit that happened in two phases, one in 2003, other in 2005, in Geneva and Tunis, respectively. This was a United Nations summit, the World Summit on Information Society. And there were big challenges about the role of the United States government in this organization. I'm going to present here a video of the ambassador that was the head of delegation of the United States during that summit. And his name is David Cross, and this was just before he headed to Tunis in 2005.
We are in the middle of the negotiations now about internet governance and a whole host of other issues to prepare the documents for the summit in November. We have a number of jobs to do as we negotiate the text of these documents. First and foremost is not to lose that which we already have. we believe, of course, with tremendous passion and zeal, that the genius of the internet was its less regulated nature. That government should stay out, but for those few very, very narrow situations where it's needed. And so how we can engage in a dialogue that gives them comfort about our intentions and the role of the U.S. government, while at the same time not endangering one iota of the sorts of things that we care about and are important, not just for the United States, but because we think they're important for everyone.
So this oversight of the United States government was very controversial, particularly from many in the United Nations that were trying to set up an international body such as the UN to take care of all these resources. So there were partial solutions, such as the creation of an Internet Governance Forum that actually still very much in place after 20 or so years after the World Summit on the Information Society, where we are still discussing a lot of the Internet governance agendas. And challenges also continued, for example, at the International Telecommunications Union, another United Nations organization, that, by the way, has a very important year this year with 3 world conferences where resolutions at the intergovernmental level will be discussed and accepted, having important influence on how the internet might behave in the next years. So all of these gave a start to a process. Actually, it finished in 2016, not so long ago, and it took almost 2 decades for it to be finalized, which was the full transition of the oversight that the United States government had against ICANN. And this oversight had to do with all of the domain name and root servers, all of the IP addresses and the protocol parameter identifiers. So from 1998 up to 2016, there was a continuous relegation of power more into the vision that you heard from Ira Megasiner to move into the private sector in a non-regulatory environment, but one that had legitimacy, also including the participation of governments. So this is Vint Cerf. He's known as the father of the internet, talking about the IANA transition process.
The project began with support from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in 1973, and in fact, preceding that was the APNIC project starting in 1968. But as time went on, responsibility for this system devolved from DARPA to the Defense Communications Agency, which is now called DISA, and then to the National Science Foundation, and then ultimately to the Department of Commerce. And in those transitions, the United States government reduced its position, its authority, its decision-making activity with regard to internet. This was a continuous, essentially relegation or delegation of responsibility away from the government.
So what happened in this process? It was super interesting because it was truly a multi-stakeholder approach where the community decided what would be the institutional frameworks that will substitute the role of the Department of Commerce. And basically it consisted about the community being in charge and being responsible. So in this case, the accountability was reversed from ICANN servicing the community actually making ICANN accountable. And as well, the Department of Commerce removed itself for different contracts to be established with the different parts of the IANA function. So protocols, numbers, and names had a contract, a service contract, basically, with IANA, the authority performing these functions under the umbrella of ICANN, and ICANN being accountable to the community. So this was one of the most important examples of multi-stakeholderism where the communities in its different stakeholder groups aggregated their interests and agreed on a plan that satisfied the United States government for it to relegate its authority and leave the ones responsible for the management of these internet resources in the hands of private sector non-for-profit companies such as ICANN. The internet today is more than 20 billion devices connected. We have around 7 billion people on Earth, and more than half of them are internet users. More than half of the internet users get their connectivity through a mobile phone, a smartphone. So it makes sense, right, that the internet governance should be led and run by different communities, the communities of stakeholders. And that also makes sense when you see, for example, AUDA's strategic plan that has such an important commitment to multi-stakeholder engagement, to champion this multi-stakeholder model that emerged from the coordination of the addressing resources throughout the last 20 or so years of internet governance of the not so usual suspects as the ones that we know about. So that's more or less what I wanted to bring to your attention today. I hope it sparks some questions and also that we can have some conversation. I'm happy and ready for that.
Thank you very much, Pablo. And that has just been a wonderful tour through history, reminding us of some very important people who were all heading in the direction of an open, free, secure, and global internet. For me, you have reminded me really that this governance model is really quite new. For it to have been settled only in 2016, that is not very long ago. So I have a couple of questions. I'm going to rely on Mike to let me know when the audience wants to take control of this part of the session. And for the audience, please submit your questions into the Zoom chat Q&A function. So just to that point, Pablo, this is all pretty new. If I think of 2016, I'm just really thinking of a toddler who's 6 years old, finally separating from various interested parents, but not very old. What's your thinking about how strong this model of internet governance is? And particularly when we say at AUDA that we want to champion that model, where should we put our effort?
Thank you. I will also mix my response with a question from Georgia. She asked whether I think the internet is safer as a result of the US government detaching from its authority over ICANN. Mm-hmm. And what I think is indeed the model is new, but there has been a lot of battles and wounds and fights around trying to build a robust multi-stakeholder governance approach to these things. And there are things that have worked well and things that haven't worked very well. But the fact that the US government accepted the plan basically meant that they gave the benefit of the doubt to the community to be and demonstrate responsibility over these important elements that enable all networks. So I would like to say that this is the beginning, and we are under the benefit of the doubt, and I really think that it is on us as organizations and us as individuals that are part of different stakeholder groups to continue to build and to suggest and participate in the policies for these resources. So it's not that, okay, then there is no government supervision, so then we're free to do anything, or this will run in automatic. Actually, it's quite the contrary. The weight of the responsibility in the private sector is quite unprecedented historically. To have such a level of societal, political, and economic things at hand, that if they don't work well, as when the internet fails, there are enormous consequences and enormous effects to the public interest. So in summary, I would say that it depends on us entirely whether we are up to the task of having a responsible internet governance model. And I don't think the answer is fully resolved. Actually, it is. We're still in the midst of it.
Thank you for that answer. One other thing that I was really interested from your presentation was when you put up the numbers, and I haven't got them quite right, but 20 billion devices, 7 billion people, 4.5 billion internet users. And at the core of that is protecting something that we have come to value enormously, which is being able to connect anyone to anyone, any device to any device, any network to any network. This is, it seems to me, coming under threat in an environment where people every day now speak quite freely about geopolitical risk. And lots of us had geopolitical risk on our risk register, never really imagining that we would find ourselves in discussions about how to actually respond to geopolitical risk. I wonder if you're able, Pablo, to just share your insights into the world that we're dealing with at the moment and what the concerns might be about the preciousness of any-to-any connectivity in this new world.
Very good question. So let me answer first the size question, and I will also mix the question from Philip and Peter about IPv6 because it's all about size, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're saying that there are more than 20 billion devices connected to the internet, we could say that at its origin, when the pioneers of the internet designed this network of networks, they only thought about as an addressing space of 4.2 billion internet addresses. So obviously they are not enough to suggest one address per device connected to the internet. And hence the need to move to a much larger space, which is called IPv6. The transition is slow because obviously it needs a good business case for networks to move their addressing into a much wider space. And there are many differences, many reasons for why this deployment of IPv6 has been slow. However, it is growing steadily now. It is around 30 to 40% of IPv6 enabled devices around it. On the geostrategy element of things, I would like to say that states are one of many stakeholder groups of the internet. And as the IANA transition process shows, there are spaces for communities, for different stakeholder groups to make decisions and to make things happen on the internet. So it suggests as well whether we all are subjugated to responsible or irresponsible state behaviors online, and whether that is actually the core of what makes the internet, and whether there is space for a defense of the public interest in spite of all these behaviors that are happening, mostly coming from state-led operations. And I think there are many players in the ecosystem, as I have shown in my presentation, that should have the ability to ramp up its technical skills and ability to make the network more resilient, more robust, more scalable, more flexible, more adaptable, that the headlines should change from the geopolitics of the internet playing out very strongly to other headlines that are more around enabling and around sort of how important changes to societies the internet can make. And I am optimistic in the sense of returning to a more public interest driven internet. And I think it all depends on the collective action. There are many more players that are non-state that I hope, again, the numbers can help to restore some sense and sensibility to what the internet is now, which is messy, right?
Magnificent in its messiness.
Indeed.
Let me just ask Mike Lewis if there are any questions from our audience. I, of course, as you know, Mike, have a very long list of questions that I can keep asking, but it's not really all about me. So over to you for a moment, Mike.
Thanks, Rosemary. And Pablo's been doing a pretty good job working in the questions to his answers. So he's covered off on most of them. There was probably one specific bit from Jeffrey Robinson. Pablo, you might want to touch on that. What would the process be of a government side to interrupt the process of the regional internet registry, i.e. China or Russia or even the USA?
So we're living in a situation in Europe in particular, and you may have seen a request from Ukraine to take down the CCTLD of Russia, and also a request by the Ukrainian government to stop delegating, and even more so to do something with internet addresses in politically meaningful places. And the reaction of the technical community was basically, we cannot do that. We don't have governance processes that allow us to disconnect. And we have built all of these institutions in order to enable connectivity, but there is no way in which you can apply the same rules and procedures to move the slide back and disconnect politically meaningful networks. And I do hope that those institutions will continue to move the slide forward toward connectivity instead of disconnecting or being part of this geopolitics, because I think there is a lot of benefits from keeping the technical community politically neutral and try to stay responsible of all parts on an equal basis.
And one more from Lisa Detheridge about innovations, Pablo, and she asks, what fresh innovations should we press towards, and what are your favourite innovations in the field? Which I know that Rosemary and the AUDA team are very focused on innovation as well. So we'd be interested to hear what you're pressing towards on the APNIC side.
I'm very passionate about that precise question. And the fact as well is that the internet governance institutions are getting old. And there is a lot of opportunity for new generations to have a fresh perspective of how the internet should run. And I think, I hope that they find open processes to influence with this new vision of what the internet is. The young use the internet in a very different way than what we were learned to use it in the early 90s. So I think there should be a space for them to have a strong say and innovate on the policy development processes of the internet, for sure.
Thank you. And Rosemary, given the time, I might hand back to you if you had any closing questions before we wrap up.
I do. I just have one before we wrap, and it's along the lines, Pablo, of APNIC's work in supporting regional development and capacity building. I think this is another really key contribution to the any-to-any internet that has driven the kind of innovation we have seen and that we want for the future. And I was wondering if you could just tell us briefly about a couple of those regional projects that you're working on.
We're very passionate about it. Since APNIC creation, it was meant to be two things. A registry of IP addresses with a purpose, the purpose being the development of the internet in the Asia-Pacific region. And as we were able to grow a sustainable organization, members of APNIC have been able to support that overall development mission that we have interpreted mostly as technical capacity building. While there are some projects to support infrastructure such as copies of root servers around the region, IXPs, etc., most of our development footprint has been technical training of network operators all throughout the region, from the Afghanistan to the last island in the Pacific. And what we have found is that it's never enough. The skills shortage of network operators in Asia Pacific is massive. So the demand is much more than whatever we can do, even if we are able to train 2,000 network engineers when we go in person, or 10,000 through our online platform, or a little bit more. So it's always sort of a tiny contribution that we're trying to make in something that has much more demand. And for that reason as well, we have started the APNIC Foundation, and we are growing our development area with alternative sources of funding. So it's a huch commitment, and it's never enough. That's what I can say, particularly in Asia Pacific, which is the fastest growing region in internet terms.
Thank you, Pablo, for those remarks, and thank you for your time today. It's really been a terrific session. We really look forward to continuing to work with you and the whole APNIC team. I'd like to also thank everybody who joined us for this webinar. And just a little reminder, if you want to stay in touch with us and stay informed about what we're doing, please take a moment to think about joining .au as a member. It's a free membership, and it'll take only a minute of your time. Just go and have a look at our website, and you'll find how easy it is. So we're planning more in-person and online events during the year, and we'll keep everybody updated via email, our digital channels, and the website. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.